The next speaker is the Member of Parliament of Bosnia-Herzegovina. Is Svetlana Novakovic-Busak.
Esteemed I.A.O. General Secretary, Mr. Helikopoulos, and Advisor, Mr. Dalis, dear professors, dear students, and dear colleagues, Christos Vaskerse. Christ is risen, and happy Easter to all. Thank you for the opportunity to speak at this important conference and to convey warm greetings from Serbian Orthodox people from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and to tell you some of my thoughts about the position of Christian values in the public sphere. Firstly, I would recommend all of us to think, do today's modern societies in general also promoting living values? For us, those values are Christian values. I'm afraid that the answer is too often negative. Today, the European continent is undergoing unconscious and consistent dismantling of value system on which the life of our ancestors was built for centuries, and on which the quality of life and progress of societies have been built upon. To be even more open and honest, we live in a world where people who promote Christian values are considered as traditionalists, giving to that term a negative context in the sense of non-modernity or something that has been overcome. In the days nowadays when Christ is risen, we are reminded again and again that without Golgotha, without suffering, there is neither resurrection nor entry into eternal life. And what is our suffering or our cross today? Or what are our duties and obligations as Christians? By birth or by our determination as Orthodox Christians, it is our obligation to profess our faith in Christ and the resurrection daily by living our family life and doing our work to which we are called. The Saint Sava, first Serbian Archbishop and founder of the Serbian Orthodox Church, in his sermon of the true faith in 1220 said, "Our faith leads us to salvation, but it must act through love. It must act. Therefore, in order for our faith to be truly fulfilled, it must be seen and felt in our thoughts, in our words and deeds, that it comes from the heart, from the place where the God is." Christianity is called to transform our everyday life, and Christ did not preach the gospel so that it would be realized somewhere in the cosmos, but in our everyday life, in our daily communication with our neighbors, in our societies, and that is area where politicians and public workers have a particularly important role. No matter what our duty is, for example, I am here in a capacity of Member of Parliament representing the Serbian people in Parliament of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but I'm primarily a medical doctor. We should be aware what is the purpose of our efforts, engagement, and sacrifice we make every day. The real sense should be in triumph of life over death and eternal joy we hope for us as a reward at the end of our journey and our bearing the cross. But in public life, in my opinion, in public life, our primary task is the fight for and protection of life, especially care for new lives, for giving birth to children and taking care of them. Because if we don't create new lives, every other job is questionable. Because God created the earth and said, populate it. In so-called modern societies, unfortunately, we have exactly the opposite picture. Aging population, low birth rate, and depopulation which is solved by immigration. Therefore, The fight for life must be our first task in public life. As a medical doctor, I'm often witness to numerous inequalities, lack of care, diseases without a cure, or inequalities in health and disease. Unfortunately, the treatment too often depends on how much money the sick person has and what kind of insurance he or she has. The second most important commandment of God is saying that our duty is to love each other as ourselves and to care for each other. It is our duty not to be indifferent to other people's problems and sufferings, to be empathetic and open to others who are in special need of trouble. Our obligation as a Christians is to think about the others, not to leave them. And all of the above mentioned can and must be translated into public policies, especially health and social policies. As a woman and mother, I know that the woman is a pillar of the family and the founder of true values in the primary family, which should act as a small church. Caring for the family must be in the focus of public policies if we want to preserve our values and even society, because we are born as individuals, but we have a soul that seeks connections and life in a community. Preserving families as a key cell of the society must be in focus of educational systems and all measures from local communities to the state strategies. We, as a Christians, or all people, should obey Ten Commandments, but do we really respect them, and do we live in accordance with them, especially in public policies regarding economy? We are witnessing that the profit is the main motive and determination of all economic policies. Even in that processes, we have to think about the position of human beings on their needs and the future. In relations with other nations and states, we politicians must promote the values of truth and justice, because without them there is no true peace. And the truth cannot be imposed. Truth is only one. As descendants of Saint Sava, the founder of our church and schools, I know that we Serbs were bearing our cross through all historical stages. Our people, no matter where they lived, and we live in environments that we share with other nations, have always been conciliatory and ready for forgive others, even in situations where our sufferings was measured by millions of victims. But we are not ready to accept falsehoods and injustices, as no other nation should accept them. And finally, I would like to convey to you one of the most important messages of our late Patriarch Pavle, who simply said to us, let us be human. Let us be human always and everywhere. If we are human, then we also be politicians who will govern well, business people who will know that in addition to good profits, the well-being of workers is also important. Family people who will take care of their children and relatives, and as individuals, if we are human, we will be worthy of the previous generations and a good example for those who will come after us. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And now the next speaker is Mrs. Letizia De Torre, representative of the International Center Politics for Unity movement, which resembles the name of the Focolare movement that we know her from. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks. I'm proudly European. But for the past 3 years, I've been living in Haifa, Holy Land, in northern Israel. Given that the world is experiencing a regression of civilization, and I myself am inside a war in the very land where Christian civilization began, I cannot help but go to the biggest Christian values, the heart of that vision for which all Christians pray every day, on earth as it is in heaven. But sadly, the very heaven of this, now my land, is today populated with drones, missiles, warplanes, iron domes, among other tragedies on the ground. From the sky comes death every day. The entire region is a hotspot of the world. I quote, 3 global powers, United States, Russia, and China, a dozen competent medium-sized powers, and 5 ongoing conflicts make the Mediterranean the strategic heart of the planet, a journalist recently wrote. To the so far insolvable wars in Syria, Libya, and Ukraine, since the 7th of October, the one between Hamas, Israel, and Iran with its proxies is added, a fire fueled by 76 years of daily conflicts, occupation, serious human rights violation. This same Mediterranean has long been shaken by terrorism, by the frantic search for new energy sources, by the dispute over waters and submarine cables, by climate change, by migration, and by political, economic, social, and even demographic crisis, also at a local level. Is the picture complete? No, because there is also another history of the Mediterranean. I quote, the sea between lands, the Mesoio, the Mediterranean Sea, cradle of history, civilizations, languages, cultures, and religions capable of interconnection and exchanges, which have guided the social processes of the entire area for centuries, contributing to the growth of the peoples who look out into it. The Ecumenical Patriarch Bartolomeo said, Bari, 2016. Why could this Mediterranean not inspire us again? How can one not wonder what role the EU has to play in the Mediterranean? But in reality, Europe rarely appears as a collective actor. Yet the EU has several ad hoc institutions in action, and the Union for the Mediterranean, bringing together 43 countries, promotes dialogue and cooperation. Why then? For many Europeans, the Mediterranean, as Bouras said, is mainly about conflicts and migration. Perhaps a more decisive step is needed, a new vision, and the determination that gave birth to Europe. The European Union does not excite anyone, not even us, when it closes itself off in domestic politics or in particular discussions, even if they concern important or sensitive issues. On the contrary, it is an inspiration to the world when it proves that collaboration between different peoples is cheaper than war, that sharing raw materials, knowledge, and innovation is a powerful lever of development for all, when it shows that breaking down borders makes everyone's land bigger and safer. Let us imagine the Mediterranean as an area of cooperation between Europe and Middle East and North Africa. Let us imagine what a new balance in international relations this area could bring, not with hard or soft power, but with the values of the European Union, yes, with Christian values. If anyone thinks it is an utopia, consider what the destabilization brings with it: global insecurity, economic recession, slowing innovation, deteriorating pollution, increased migration, traumatic consequences on young people, the ongoing dehumanization. We are here talking about Europe because three great European Christian statements and men and women of goodwill believed that fraternity among peoples was possible. Let's call on the future EU Parliamentary Commission to guide the Union to active leadership on the stage of a Mediterranean of peace. Let's network with the many organizations, churches, religion movements, research countries. They are a lot, really. Initiatives and statements, such as on human fraternity for world peace and living. Of course, we have no time to commit ourselves and propose a concrete strategy. We would need another conference. But what is important today is our awareness of the capability and the responsibility of Europe. Yes, we can. A Mediterranean uniting diversity, as the motto of the EU says, is possible. And I really think that the role of Europe is urgent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We all pray for the Mediterranean to be a sea of blessed peace and prosperity. Θα δώσω τον λόγο αμέσως τώρα στην ουδεσιμότατη Almuth.
The floor to Reverend Almuth Brettschneider-Felsmann.
Christus är uppstånden. Han är sannoliken uppstånden. Christ is risen, even in Sweden. The document, Europe Be Yourself, is based on that Christian values should characterize the political work of the European institutions. Here the question needs to be discussed first. What do we as churches mean by Christian values? What do we mean by them having to mark the political programs and pre-election campaigns as it is written in the document? Are Christian values really different from the European values written down in the EU treaty? They are probably more sources than statements. As our Archbishop Emerita Antje Jacquelian said some years ago, if democracy is to survive, it must be constantly fed a diet of values. For this it also needs the values that arise from constantly fresh encounters with the great traditions of human ideas. Quote is ended. But what is the way to share these values? I read in the program for this conference that there are doubts whether the churches are heard in the political processes that are going on. Which other organizations and actors, religious and non-religious, do we need to cooperate with to be heard on specific issues? Because it is on specific issues that the Christian values become concrete. Not as churches for our own sake, but as actors together in society who are committed, who are passionate about certain issues. And which issues we are passionate about, which we consider to be those that rest on the Christian values, we seek support for in our common basic document, the Bible, in the history of theology that forms our churches, and we are formed in quite different ways, and in the reflection about the time we live in. We also know that we are not only marked by text, but also by context. The societal, the political, the cultural context that surrounds us, which is our home, characterizes how we look at the world, how we interpret what Christian values are. Here we experience something very painful, that many, even contradictory opinions are called based on Christian values. The soul of Europe, the idea that we are one and belong together was born in a European context that was heavily influenced by Christianity. However, the values that emerged there and even the values in our churches were also born in shock and despair at what had been possible, and I'm German by birth, what had been possible during 2 world wars and during the Shoah. Even this is painful, to remember that these, the human's deepest abysses, were also carried by Christian theology. Today, our longing for Europe's soul should get us to work for an inclusive, not an exclusive Europe. And this is a huge task, which we as churches are challenged to contribute to. However, this does not mean that we as churches should withdraw into the private. We should not be silent. Christianity is about life. Our churches live in the world and need to focus on having theological answers for questions that are asked in our world. And they can be different in the north or in the south of Europe. This year, the Church of Sweden is reflecting on the question of how our presence and involvement in the public space should look like. What place do we have there? What mission? This autumn, our thematic synod will work with these questions based on a study document that the Lutheran World Federation published in 2016, which is called The Church in the Public Space. Based on a new interpretation and reasoning about the Lutheran Two Kingdoms doctrine, the mission of our church in the public space can be described as follows. The church needs to defend people's value and rights, through all activities work for the healing of creation. This requires both pointing out injustice and deficiency, but also to bear witness to restoration and liberation for people and for the earth. The church thus needs to both proclaim the law and proclaim the gospel. Therefore, the church's mission can be understood as a call to contribute, together with all people of goodwill, whatever goodwill is, to the creation of societies and the public space characterized by justice and inclusion. The document, The Church in the Public Space, describes then characteristics of the Christian engagement in the public space from a Lutheran perspective. This is my dialect. I share these with you because I see these as starting points for our conversations about among the different churches. A conversation about how we as churches and Christians with missions in different contexts in this world are actually shaped by Christian values. What carries us? What strengthens us? What helps us to even question ourselves and again in those processes? These characteristics are courage and clarity, faith, patience and persistence, called hope, solidarity and empowerment, called love. Can these characteristics guide us in our conversations? These conversations are needed between our churches in different contexts and with the same text at the center. Patience, clarity, and solidarity need to characterize our conversations, which so often are shaped by statements and our own perceptions instead. We also share perceptions here today. These characteristics could also guide us in our conversations in the political arenas in Brussels, Stockholm, Athens, Berlin, and on other places. Probably this arena here in Thessaloniki is one of them. To listen to each other and raise perspectives of those in our communities and in the world who are otherwise not heard. To have conversations with each other and see the other's face, Emmanuel Levinas. To walk a distance together and dare to look in every corner of our continent and far beyond it, into the injured world, the vulnerable life on it, the damaged creation around us. It is perhaps in this way that the values that carry us also carry our conversations in political contexts. The churches have an important mission together in the public space. We need to fill that with hope and love, less with the demand that our Christian values be heard. Faith will carry us. Thank you.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ. Η συνεργασία με τους ανθρώπους καλής θελήσεως.
Cooperation with people of a good will is something that is mentioned in the public scripts of all European churches. So maybe we should need to discuss this later on in order to see how these are related to Christian values and what type of dialogue can be developed within this context. Mr. Kosiopoulos, thank you very much. And let's move on to the next presentation according to the agenda. The speaker is Mr. Nikolaos Papanastasopoulos, who is Assistant Professor of International Politics at the Department of Political Science of Democritus University of Thrace. You have the floor, sir. Thank you. Good afternoon, and I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers for their invitation and wish you all the best in your work. So based on my background and the topic of the round table, I shall speak about the unity of the European continent, the European Union, and how political unity has replaced Christian unity. That is, in other words, I shall try to show how the needs of international politics have set aside Christian values. In the historical course of the West, there were some cases, periods of unity at the end of the Roman Empire and also during the Charlemagne reign. The church was then a common factor of European orientation. When most German and other races began to be Christianized, the Christian element is viewed with the Crusades and the liberation of the Holy Lands, and religion gradually leads to a differentiation of Europe from the lands of the East. The oldest political definition of Europe was given in relation to a common Christian identity based on religious identity based on Christianity. As a result, the Christian kingdom was something distinct from the people of the East, particularly the Muslim Turks. From a historical perspective now, the Europe that the popes wanted to defend vis-à-vis the Ottoman aggression after the fall of Constantinople were Res Publica Christiana, the Christian Republic. In the 15th century, the king of Bohemia made an appeal to the other monarchs of Europe to join together in order to protect Christianity, and this appeal was viewed as the first plan for European integration. The views of Europe after the end of the Ottoman threat and religious reform as a single space with territorial characteristics leads to states with secular leaders replacing the sense of the Christian kingdom of the past. On a political level, following the Treaty of Westphalia, which is the beginning of the modern international system, we see a new political and geopolitical reality, according to which we have the European dominant state, borders between states, non-intervention in domestic affairs, obedience only to political leader, and secularization through the emancipation of the Pope. Before that, we had Rector with the result d'etat, which subjects any religious tie to political interests. I don't know if it was Machiavelli that ousted religion or Hobbes with Leviathan, but it was definitely Rector with regard to this particular issue. In the 17th century, we have a territorial nation-state and a secular identity of Europe, which was viewed to operate as a republic, since the states would balance out each other through a balance of power. That is, the power of one would be balanced by the power of the rest. Therefore, thinkers such as William Penn, Saint-Pierre, Immanuel Kant developed a plan for a more peaceful system that would be based on European Union unity. Europe, again, as a political sense, as a continent of dominant state, replaces the older concept of Christianity, that is, of a continent with a common religious identity. thinkers at the time analyzed the various conditions based on which we could have a continuous peace in Europe. And this goal, and this was the price that had to be paid, had to reconcile with the need to protect individual freedoms and freedom of worship included. These thinkers did not want a unity imposed by violence or by going back to a common religious identity. Therefore, at the Vienna Conference, despite the Holy Alliance, we see that geopolitics predominate. In the 20th century, looking at the European integration through the EC and the European Union, we see the following situation. The steps taken for European integration led to a continuation of this removal of the Christian element, of the religious element. Geopolitics predominated. In the institutional text of the European integration, we have no mention of Christianity, and only certain figures speak about its Christian identity, the ancient Greek heritage, or the Roman tradition. Any such references refer to religion in general. So we see at the preface of the Lisbon Treaty, there's a reference to political, religious, and cultural heritage of Europe, speaking of the values of human rights, etc. Also, the articles that had to do with the functioning of the European Union, which creates a basis for an open, transparent, and regular dialogue. And it's important to note that within this multifaceted character of Europe, tradition is viewed as an element of unity rather than divergence. In the U.S., we do not have a situation such as that of Europe because there is a different tradition of political anthropology there. So any effort to transfer such models from one area to the next need to take all these elements into account and the relevant societies at stake. There seems to be a trend to become orphans from our Christian past, and the subjugation of Europe to various unprovoked schemes has led to a change of its religious and cultural DNA. It's different to have an open Europe without religion and a Europe that does not understand its spiritual ideals as an element of cohesion. An open Europe does not mean a closed door towards religion in any way. So a key to this symbiosis are not only geopolitical needs, but in order to deal with current issues, the values of religion and of Christianity in particular must have a very substantial and strategic role to play. Thank you.
Ωραία. Και θα ολοκληρώσω.
Thank you very much. The last speaker in this first round is Reverend Manuel Barrios Prieto, Secretary General of COMECE, the Commission of the Bishops' Conferences of the EU.
So, Christ is risen. We are celebrating, you know that we have different calendars. In the Roman Catholic Church, we are already towards the end of the Easter season. This Sunday we'll celebrate Pentecost. It was still this Easter time. So I'm going to be very brief to leave a bit of time for discussion. I'll just indicate some things that I think have come out also in this session yesterday and the session today. Also, I find very, very important the document that was signed yesterday. So I would like also to make reference to it. So first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this event, because I think this event is also a sign that we want to work together for Christian values in Europe. So thanking the Interparliamentary Assembly on Orthodoxy, Paul, the Secretary General, spoke yesterday. I had a very good contact, and I still have a good contact with Kostas. We have become friends. And I'm very, very happy of this, I have to say. Then thanking Keck, very good collaboration to organize this conference with Caterina. We have also here the president of CEC, thanking the Holy Metropolis of Thessalonica, and also thanking this faculty of theology. I think this is the first thing to say. Being together here today, speaking about Christian values, and we see that there are differences between us on how we understand these values, is important. I think the first thing to say is that being here together and talking to each other, listening to each other, we are celebrating in the Roman Catholic Church a synod, and the basic idea of this synod is to listen to each other, to work together, even when we have different views. So, a few things that I want to just to point out. We talked today about the instrumentalization of Christian values. I think this is an issue we have to be aware of. And one can use the church, one can use COMECE, I think also CEC, for other goals that are not religious goals. So we have to be very careful with instrumentalization. And this can happen in various directions. We talked about using Christian values for nationalistic goals, changing them to the term of national values. We talked about, the speaker today talked about the theology of liberation. So, there is these populist movements also now in Europe. So I think we have to be careful with this of instrumentalizing Christian values, and we can fall also into this temptation. Second, what we can do to promote Christian values. The title of this panel is Role of Christian Values in Public Life, mainly in the economic and social sphere. So, how can we promote the role of Christian values in the social, economic sphere, but also in others? What can we do as church or churches? So I would say, and this is also a distinction made by one of the speakers today, we have to distinguish what the church can do as institution and what can the members of the churches do, associating themselves freely, or also as individuals. So I would say, as institutional church, we have a very important mission, and it's the mission of teaching, of preaching. And I think we have to use this. Pope Francis, in his first document, wrote an encyclical letter called Evangelii Gaudium. He said he dedicated a long part of it to preaching. So teaching, education, we are here in a university, education as an important way of promoting Christian values for the church. And then culture, promoting Christian culture. We talked here in relation to Armenia, what's happening in the region of the promoting cultural heritage. I think that's very important. Promoting a Christian ethos. So, our work in culture. And then we have specific structures that the churches have given themselves to try to have a voice in the political world. One that was not exactly a church initiative in itself, as a church institution, is I.A.O., but we have in the Catholic Church COMECE, the Commission of the Bishops' Conferences of the European Union. I think this is very important. It was CEC. If CEC didn't exist, it should be invented. Now that I've been 5 years Secretary General of COMECE, I think if COMECE did not exist, it should be invented. Why? Because we need a specific body of our church or our churches to act, to interact with the political world, to see what policies are being made, to contribute to these policies, to bring the voice of the church to these policies. And this is what COMECE does. And CEC also. CEC is a different organization. It represents many churches. It has an office in Brussels, and it's also working on this. So what we can do as churches. Then, what we can do as individuals, or as individuals that are associated, I think this is also very important in the political world, what Christian politicians can do. Sometimes it's quite surprising that when it comes to voting in the European Parliament, many Christian politicians don't vote according to Christian teaching. So why is this? Why is it that sometimes a political alliance, being part of a party, is more important than following one's own conscience? So I think this is also something to be taken into account. We can promote Christian values also as individuals, also as journalists, as professors, in our work. Then, way of doing this, way of promoting Christian values. I was very impressed, as I was always impressed, with what Dr. Midari said before. So, what's a way of promoting Christian values? Do we have to advocate for Christian values being explicitly mentioned as such in the text of the European Union? Do we want the European Constitution to speak of God explicitly? Is this the fight we want to make together? Or are we better off if Christian values are included and shape the legal text and the policies without being mentioned explicitly? What is better? What is better? That we start the Constitution of Europe that speaking about God, and then in legal terms and in policy terms we do things totally contrary to that? Or are we fighting more for Christian values to be present, even if not explicitly mentioned as Christian? Was said before, what's the difference between the European values stated in Article 2 of the Treaty of the Union with Christian values? Are Christian values different from European values? Do they add something? What is specific of Christian values? So are we going to fight to defend Christian values, mentioning that they're mentioned as such? Or are we more in the line of fighting for our values, even if they're not said explicitly to be Christian? So some problems I see in all this, and I can speak a lot. As you know, priests, we have this tendency to speak a lot. So a few things, problems that I see and problems that I think we should address together. And I think this of addressing together is really something important, that we're here, different churches, different mentalities, also different cultures, but we try to work together for Christian values. I think that, as I said at the beginning, is very important. So problems that I see. One of the problems I see is to agree on these Christian values. In the introduction to this panel, some of the Christian values are mentioned: justice, forgiveness, charity, peace, love. Very, very good. Others, no, I think should be included. Dignity of the human person, subsidiarity was also mentioned. So what are these Christian values that we want to fight for? Then, way we advocate for these Christian values is by documents. We have yesterday signed this important document. This document was written together by I.A.O., CEC, and COMECE. It was made public in March. It's an appeal in view of the coming European elections. So there's a way of working together for Christian values. But maybe there are others that we have to see together. Then another issue. We are living in a post-secular world, not a secular world only, a post-secular world. What does this mean? Does this mean that now there is a possibility of a new relationship between the churches and the civil authorities? Article 17 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union might be an expression of this. Now we're living in a new situation. So how are we as Christians trying to live and to work and to comply with our mission in this new situation? Then, the coming European elections. The 6th, 9th of June. Are we doing something together? Apart from this statement that is very important. We want to, in some way, invite the people to choose responsibly for good politicians that are going to promote a Christian culture and Christian values in Europe. So I think this is important. And just to conclude, I have more things, but I want to conclude with this to leave the floor open. We are facing a lot of issues that are important, that are changing our world. One was mentioned this morning, artificial intelligence. Very good. This, I think, as Christians, we have to try to see together what this means anthropologically for a way of understanding men and women, but also our society. What does this mean for work? People that are going to lose their work. So artificial intelligence obviously is a very big issue. But another issue that is changing, I think, Europe is migration and asylum. This is changing a lot our societies in Europe. This sometimes brings us to be confronted also with new religions that are entering Europe and becoming very strong. And I'm referring clearly to Islam. And it's very surprising. 2 weeks ago, I was in England, and it was surprising to hear that a very famous agnostic that wrote a book on the delusion of God, he now claims to be a cultural Christian. He's agnostic, but he's a cultural Christian because he sees this different culture that is coming. So how as churches are we confronted with this, of this change of the religions in Europe and the change of the culture of Europe? It's as if Dokan says that he's a cultural Christian, that means that he feels that there is really a cultural roots to the culture in Europe that is different from the one that the migrants are bringing. So this is it. I'll conclude saying I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy of this initiative, and I think we have to continue with this, working together, if we want to have our voice as churches heard. Even being tolerant with our differences, that sometimes are also big. Thank you very much.